This is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the biggest films in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood. All the media lies, and this guy is gay, and this guy is gay. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I wanted to do a summary review and analysis of Dave McGowan's weird scenes inside the canyon, Laurel Canyon covert ops, and the dark heart of the hippie dream. A lot of people out there like Dave's book, and I remember coming in contact with his material about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Started listening to his interviews, and I thought they were pretty fantastic. So I got his book some months ago, read it when I was in Florida, and I thought it was pretty phenomenal. So the reason we're going to do an analysis of this book in this episode of Esoteric Hollywood is because I think, if I started thinking back to maybe 10 years ago when I started blogging and writing in the subjects that I write on, I would have thought it was insane to think that the majority of these industries, be they music industry, Hollywood, entertainment, etc., that they were essentially controlled and had a intimate tie-in to the intelligence complex in industry. Intelligence so-called, of course. And what the intelligence complex in this regard refers to is really the culture creation complex. Now, we've talked about this many times. I've mentioned the graduate classes that I did in terms of Marxist critical theory and the Frankfurt School. And if we recall, the Frankfurt School was, of course, this later incarnation of Marxism that primarily focused on culture and the culture industry. And so this would be figures like Theodor Adorno, and Max Horkheimer, and of course the seminal book Dialectic of Enlightenment, where they chart the progress or process of culture, so to speak, or what they call culture, in the 20th century post-World War II, and how this is really it's a tool of the what they call the capitalist powers. But Horkheimer and Adorno in that work, of course, take a very Nietzschean approach to things. They no longer hold to the utopian or progressive ideas of the proletariat revolution. Marxism by that time had discarded this idea as unrealistic, given the wars and so forth. And the focus shifted towards culture. And that's essentially what the Frankfurt School did, was begin to look at cultural analysis, Kulturkritik, culture critique, and the idea that you could change things, so to speak, by constant and perpetual negation, right? Constant critique. You critique, the guy after you critiques your critique, and then critique of the critique of the critique, ad infinitum. Now that is relevant because that's where we start to see, as we know, the tie-in to things like the Central Intelligence Agency in the 40s and 50s being connected to all of these admin and the ad guys going to work for the Pentagon, vice versa, revolving door scenario. And from there what you have is the control of the culture industry, right? Now, I'm not going to take the Marxist view of all of this because that is merely one aspect of controlled dialectics, of course. But there's no doubt that what they're calling, of course, the capitalist imperialist powers in the Marxist critique, elements of that are correct insofar as it is the corporate big business atmosphere, so to speak, that dominates in that pyramidal hierarchy. And of course above that would be the banks and the international crime syndicate families, the so-called Illuminati, whatever appellations and terms you'd like to choose. Now, once you dive deeper and deeper into this, you begin to see, as I said, now 10 years later, having done quite a bit of work in this field and even focusing in my graduate work and my master's work on that very topic, it's all very plain to me. As I said, 10 years ago, it sounded crazy. What? CIA in Hollywood? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, yeah. And why would that be? Well, because the CIA and OSS and so forth were certainly involved in foreign espionage and covert operations, but here at least, it's largely about public opinion, swaying mass opinion, swaying attitudes, and so forth. And it's the same power structure that runs the roundtable groups and so forth, as we saw in Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, and as we will see in my upcoming lectures on the entirety of the book. It is those power structures that set up the CFR and the media mogul organizations in the U.S., and that would even include people that we think are so-called media moguls, Rupert Murdoch and so forth. They're all part of the same establishment. They're not operating outside the box. They just operate within the pyramidal structure, choosing, whether it be MSNBC or Fox or whatever, choosing the faux left-right dialectic. And this is all about manipulation and creation of culture. And Dave's book is important in this regard because it fits right into that critique. And it fits into that critique because he is dealing with the rise of the counterculture. This is the 1960s free love counterculture revolution of hippies and all the things that we all know in the popular vernacular, and most of that is traced to the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco in the mainstream. However, McGowan's thesis is that no, we must look a little bit earlier to the area of Hollywood, LA, and Laurel Canyon. And it is there that we will actually find the beginning of the counterculture movement. And rather than it being counterculture, in fact, it is establishment counterculture. The establishment was not unaware of the rise of the counterculture. It was not a purely organic movement of ideologues and free love revolutionaries who sought to overthrow the strictures and taboos of the prior existing 40s and 50s framework of the Protestant work ethic and the company man, so to speak. It was rather something foreseen and steered in a certain direction. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't artists and musicians involved in the movements that were not sincere or had political activism and motivations as part of their ethos, but rather that the movement as a whole could be steered simply by propping up the figures that were there to be establishment figures, right? The chosen people who would be, say, the Jim Morrison, or to be the John Phillips, to be the Frank Zappa. Those are the people who would receive the establishment support, getting the record deals and so forth, getting the feature stories in Rolling Stone, getting major airtime, getting television time and so forth that would propel them, right? Because it's all about, becoming big on that level. Becoming an icon is not something that happens organically. It can only, in our system, it can only happen with the support of the system itself, and that's because of the tremendous amount of money that it takes to become one of these icons. It's not organic. Now, if it ever happens organically, the machines and methods are in place to make sure that organic rise is co-opted. And that's another aspect of McGowan's thesis in this book, is that whatever artists and musicians of the 60s that were legitimately counterculture, they were either co-opted eventually, or they were just kind of filtered out and faded into obscurity and oblivion to make way for the non-political, non-activist icons of essentially hedonism and cultural degeneracy, right? And that's why they would be promoted, and that fits perfectly into the Frankfurt School, modern abstract art. All of this is burgeoning at the same time, right? And then you can see why that fits in. Right? We'd rather have icons of hedonism, blowing your brains out on drugs, dying at 27, right, than persons who might promote healthy ideas, right, or genuine anti-war activists, right, who weren't just mindlessly anti-war like some sort of Occupy movement, but rather had perhaps something more to say than mindless slogans. And no, none of that is amenable to the system in which we inhabit now, which is a culture industry. It's a massive superstructure of interlocking corporations, banks, NGOs, and so forth that exist to re-engineer humanity. And as we've said many times, and others and other shows have pointed out, it's a business plan. It's a business plan that's laid out in stages, and there are actuaries and there are prognostications and white papers and plans and strategies, and this comes in all forms and fashions, be it government, be it private, for how to get to a desired place down the road, and what the desired place will be down the road, and then how to go to the next stage or phase. Much like we have made the analogy many times of a supermarket will receive a facelift, and you'll move all of the old advertisements and end caps out to put in the new, right? And this usually takes a process of several weeks, depending on what store you work at, and that's because it needs to constantly be updated. You always need to be ahead of the game, know the trends and so forth, and then of course also create the trends. And that's really getting to the heart of Dave's thesis in his book, is that the icons of the leftist cause were not sincere, genuine icons of the leftist cause. And he provides a host of examples of how that is, which we're going to see here in a minute as we get into the meat of Dave's book, which begins in chapter 1 with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And this is where we have the story of Admiral Morrison, the father of Jim Morrison, who was in fact directly involved in the false flag event known as the Gulf of Tonkin, which led to the quagmire of Vietnam. Now, I want to mention before we get to the meat of Dave's book in chapter 1 that if you like his material, I have my own book that is very similar. While Dave tends to focus on the music industry, my book focuses on film and Hollywood. And so in many ways it's similar, although I deal a lot more with symbolism and the esoteric in regards to various films that most of us have seen, such as Kubrick films, 2001, David Lynch movies, Hitchcock, 007, all that kind of stuff, those classics, as well as newer films, including some 80s fantasy kid films that we all grew up with, if you're around my age. And I really delve deeply into the meaning and sometimes the subtext and subtle hidden meanings in those films that you're not going to find elsewhere. So I would encourage you, if you like Dave's book, you'll also very much like esoteric Hollywood, sex, cults, and symbols in film. And as of now, this is May 15th, 2016. The book is scheduled to release in 1 month, but it can be pre-ordered now. You can order your copy through Trine Day Publishers or on Amazon. And as I said, the title is Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. So, funny thing happened. I actually had to go back. Most of my manuscript was done in terms of the content about a year ago. I had to do a lot of rewriting and revisions, and it was after that I read Dave's books. So I actually had to go back and add in a good bit of material and information that I got from Dave McGowan, because it was so relevant to what I had done, particularly in regards to how aspects of the Lookout Mountain laboratories and so forth tie into Hollywood. And Dave's book, Laurel Canyon scene also ties into a lot of Hollywood figures as well. But as I said, focuses on the music industry and the music counterculture. So, but I wanted to mention that because you'll like my book if you like this. It's very much in the same vein. And in fact, Amazon actually classes them together. So, they do that promo of buy this and you also get this for $35 or whatever. I had nothing to do with that. That was all Amazon's decision. So I'm very honored to be classed with Dave's book because it was really good. It was a fun read. And I know that you guys out there listening will enjoy both of these books. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that Amazon discount there and get them both, because both books go well together. And my book, as I said, is a kind of a compliment to him, and it wasn't intended that way. It just kind of happened that way, because I'd only come in contact with his material, as I said, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and the majority of my essays had already been written by then as well. So this is also not intended to be a replacement for the actual reading of his book. If you've listened to Jay's analysis talks over the last couple years, as I've really started focusing on doing these regularly, you'll know that we've done a few book reports, quite a few, and my book reports are not substitutes for actual reading of the book, precisely because Dave's book is 300 pages. You're not going to be able to get all the material in a couple audio talks that you will get if you actually purchase and read the book. I know that's crazy to talk about, actually buying a book and reading it. We live in the age of the YouTube video, but that is a pathetic, pale replacement for the actual reading of books. So please do get Dave's book. I recommend it. I'm still working on the Jay's Analysis recommended reading list, but certainly this will be on there. And if you do a website, narrowing down the choices for the recommended reading list is actually, for me at least, a very difficult decision. So a lot of factors come into that, and trying to figure out like what the top 5 in different categories are is not easy. But anyway, let's get to Dave's book. Now, he begins, as we said, talking about Vietnam and how that was a scam, and would ultimately, of course, tie into drug running and all that through back in the 1960s, through the Gulf of Tonkin false flag incident, which mobilized the population to support this ridiculous, unpopular war. And we learned that Frank Zappa's father, of all people, was a chemical warfare specialist assigned to the Edgewood Arsenal near Baltimore, Maryland. He was deeply enmeshed in the program, as well as frequently being cited in MK Ultra operations. Now, why would I say that? Well, that's according to Dave, but that makes sense because MK Ultra was classified under biowarfare, because it was the use of chemical agents, right? So it makes perfect sense why we would see that. Dave moves from there to talk about the characters in the Phillips family. Now, this is a very complex, confusing genealogy. This is all new to me. Obviously, everybody's heard the mamas and the papas, but I can't keep up with all this family and who's who and all this, because it's just crazy. But basically, the Don of the family here, Papa John Phillips, was a major figure in the Laurel Canyon scene and the emerging counterculture across America. Phillips would pen an inspiring, an insipid song known as San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Flowers in Your Hair, that quickly rose to the top of the pop charts, McGowan says. And along with the Monterey Pop Festival and the '67 Haight-Ashbury phenomenon, this is really what got the 60s revolution going in the pop scene. They're also going to tie into the 1967 Summer of Love, I'm saying. They're also going to tie into the Manson family, the, quote, family, who spent time at the log cabin and the home of Mama Cass, right, big old Mama Cass. So not only will that be relevant, but it's also going to tie into Crosby, Stills, and Nash. We mentioned Frank Zappa. It's going to tie into CIA operations, actually. So John Phillips, apparently, spent time in Havana, Cuba, during the height of the Cuban Revolution, quote, fighting for Castro, according to his own claims. Now, this does seem a little bit ridiculous, that this very well-connected Western establishment family would that this guy would go off to fight for Castro. But then again, when we think about Castro and Che, well, they also were members of the establishment who became icons and figures of counterculture and counter-establishment. I believe both Che and Fidel were from prominent, wealthy families of lawyers, something to that effect. They both, especially Fidel, had a period where he was an actor. You can see this on his IMDb page, where he had small roles in films in the 1940s. Now, on top of all that, Stills will pen perhaps the first and certainly one of the most disturbing anthems of the 60s generation, called Bluebird. And that's interesting because that's also a title of a project in MK Ultra. And so what we begin to see, and the reason I think a lot of what Dave's talking about is legit, is because the majority of the purpose of MK Ultra was not the programmed assassin creation of multiples and alters and dissociative states in some individual spy, but rather to apply those techniques on a mass scale to the population as a whole. Why would you do that? Well, to create the Brave New World scenario, to create the mass population of completely controlled, drugged up zombies. Right? And that's really where we're going, and where we pretty much are. And this quote revolution was a big part of that, the 60s revolution. And again, it benefits the establishment, right? And the establishment doesn't care about counterculture individuals out there calling for radically new ways of living. All of that ultimately benefits the designs of the establishment. And so Dave argues that before John Phillips arrived in Laurel Canyon, Stephen Stills was another product of a career military family. This is Crosby, Stills, and Nash, in other words. Raised in Texas, young Stephen spent large swaths of his childhood in El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Panama, and various parts of Central America, alongside his father, who was helping to, quote, spread democracy, and as well as being educated at military bases and elite military academies. Exactly. He had an abrasive authoritarian personality. Well, that's how people in the military usually are. And so Stills was involved in CIA Special Forces in in Vietnam. He served with uniformed ground troops in Vietnam, but what will be ignored is the undeniable fact, Dave writes, that the U.S. had thousands of, quote, advisors, that is, CIA Special Forces operatives, active as ground troops in Vietnam. Exactly. And we will also be talking about, in a future show, Apocalypse Now. And this will tie in again to Dave's work with his book Program to Kill, because Dave argues that the Phoenix program, right, the mass murder supposedly of the Viet Cong, which was actually mass murder of women and children in villages as part of a CIA program, Special Forces program, that probably could have led to the serial killer phenomenon, because you have all these guys who were forced and trained to kill women and children, not Viet Cong, and then when they come back, they're complete psychos and multiple altered, possessed wackos who then become, perhaps, involved in the serial killer phenomenon, right? Henry Lee Lucas and these kind of characters. Also interesting is the connections of these people, the Flying Burrito Brothers, one of these more, to me at least, obscure bands, and Crosby, to the mob. And this is an aspect of all this that we've been talking about quite a bit here at Jay's Analysis in the last year or two is the mob tie-in to this stuff, because that's also very real. But now the theater of the FBI versus the mob and the CIA and the government and the corporate agents and the mob and everybody warring with each other, that's not really right. So the way that you see it in the movies of everybody kind of warring at each other's, battling each, that's not really the case. Perhaps at certain times in different degrees that happens. The FBI might bust mobsters somewhere, but this is generally, or the CIA might have some kind of covert operation where they take out some, quote, drug lord, as if you watch the movie Sicario, it kind of hinted at this. But that's also kind of theatrics, because we know that the CIA basically teamed up with the mob, and that's how the drug running happened, right, throughout 60s, 70s, and 80s, and so forth, with Unholy Alliance, right, and Gary Webb's book, right? So that also tied into the mob, and it's always been that way. And I like that McGowan talks about a lot of the mob connections, particularly in relation to Mickey Dolenz. Not that Mickey Dolenz was a mobster, but that monkey Mickey Dolenz, eccentric prodigy Van Dyke Parks, that these people were connected to James Taylor, and all spent time in the Laurel Canyon scene around Larry Wildman Fisher, who was institutionalized repeatedly during his teens for attacking his mother with a knife. And finally, you meet the offspring of an organized crime figure, Warren Zevon, the son of William Stumpy Zevon, the infamous lieutenant for Mickey Cohen. So number 2 under Mickey Cohen, I guess, or something to that effect. And so you got this fascinating nexus of criminal syndicates, be it drugs, be it CIA culture creation, be it corporate interests, military interests, so forth, mobsters, that all will benefit from the promotion of this counterculture, right? Now think about, in terms of, say, drugs, what does the counterculture do for drug? Well, it makes drugs very popular, very sexy right now. So if you could purchase cocaine 100 years ago at your local apothecary, or opium or something derivative to that effect, well, it's not very sexy. It's not that big of a deal, is it? Right? I mean, you might have some old guy who, is 60 years old and he's the town opium addict or something, like, Bela Lugosi or Sherlock Holmes type character, something like that. I mean, I have some image of a guy like that, but it didn't appear to be rampant. Now, I'm sure that housewives, as I understand, were at different times in the 40s and 50s taking quite a few pills and narcotics and so forth. And that's because that was, of course, marketed as solutions to the morose grind of the daily housewife lifestyle, right? And so you needed some picker-upper or something, or some stimulant, or conversely some calming effect. And so there were, as I understand, quite a few pill-popping mommies in the 40s and 50s. But that still was marketed as something medicinal. And so what happens in the 60s is that, kind of like the temperance movement and alcohol, the speakeasies and all this kind of stuff, is that it makes it underground, it makes it sexy, it makes it popular, and it makes it a valuable hidden commodity, right? It's esoteric, right? To get a hold of drugs and to know your dealer and where do you get it? Oh, you get it here, and right, and it becomes an aspect of the counterculture, which ultimately benefits the market that surrounds the drugs, right? So it's tremendously profitable for certain families and interests to have it illegal, and thereby maintain a monopoly on the drug trade, right? This is a whole incident that we see. This is what we learned through Freeway Ricky Ross and all those situations in the 80s and 90s with the crack epidemic, right? And so it's the same with what's going on here in the 60s, that the drug epidemic that begins to flower is intentionally promoted by the establishment. And this is why I talk a lot about hallucinogens, that you see all these alternative media counterculture figures promoting hallucinogens like this is some sort of new salvation or something, and it's all spiritual and all this crap. No, it's directly out of Brave New World. That's what Aldous Huxley said, and that is the beginnings of the MK Ultra program, at least its British equivalent, through Tavistock and so forth. And that was written, as we said many times, in 1932, predicting, where we would be nowadays. But to get to where we are nowadays from 1932, Brave New World, we need things like 60s revolution. You see, that's the bridge to today. Now, of course, there's a lot of other things that are bridges as well. Unpopular wars and so forth can actually be bridges. Believe it or not, yes, an unpopular war can be useful for the shaping of new opinions, right? For the shaping of making America intentionally unpopular, right? Now that sounds a little outlandish, but no, that's because America is ultimately intended to be dismantled, and is why? Well, because it's the beta version of the New World Order, right? Now we have other figures that come into play here. Abby Hoffman, and as I said, the promotion of LSD, this is all at the behest of the CIA. Now, I'm not just getting this from Dave's book, but this is well known. Everybody knows Tim Leary worked for the CIA. Princeton and Yale are promoting this. Harvard, they're promoting CIA MK Ultra experiments were done there. The Unabomber was, according to his obituary, involved in the MK Ultra program. Look that up. That's in either LA Times or New York Times in his obituary. So Peter Coyote, who is the keymaster in E.T., if you've seen E.T., the guy with the keys, narrates a documentary on hippies, the History Channel, pointing out that some on the left even theorized that hippies were the end result of a plot by the CIA to neutralize anti-war movements with LSD, turning protesters into self-absorbed navel-gazers. Yes, actually, Peter Coyote is correct. Now, Peter Coyote is a Marxist, as I understand, and I point this out in my ET analysis, but curious that he kind of figured out what was going on here. This hippie movement didn't actually change anything for the good. It did change things for the bad, and neutralized all of the perhaps legitimate anti-war sentiment. Well, that's at least Dave's thesis, and I think there's something to that, and it makes perfect sense, right? Because again, it's Brave New World. I don't know how. It's not hard to figure this out. This Brave New World is about turning everybody into drugged out zombies, and there's just so many connections that it is going to be difficult to point them out. But one of the important ones I think we should mention here is Phil Spector, the legendary music producer and I believe convicted murderer, if I recall, from the 90s, whose crack team of studio musicians, the Wrecking Crew, are the actual musicians who play the recordings, the LPs, when you hear the Monkees, the Byrds, the Beach Boys, the Mamas, and the Papas. Right now, not necessarily every song, but the Wrecking Crew is the actual music behind these so-called bands, while the bands function as kind of advertising fronts. That's interesting. Now, another interesting connection is that we have Dave's next chapter is going to deal with the Laurel Canyon death list, and this is the prominent people who spent time in this region who did not live too long. And they didn't live too long because they're living this, not just this wild lifestyle, but also because there could be other things involved, right? They could have known where all the bodies are. They could have, this deaths could have been staged to create icons and martyrs. I mean, who knows, right? But he mentions Marina Elizabeth Habe, whose body was carved up and tossed in the heavy brush along Mulholland Drive. Think of David Lynch's film, Mulholland Drive. Just west of Beaumont Drive in 1968, Habe, 17 at the time of her death, was the daughter of Hans Habe. Hans Habe was in the OSS. So here we are, right back to intelligence connections here. And he goes through and mentions several weird, unexpected connections to Laurel Canyon. Jimi Hendrix being one, who served a stint in the Army in the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell. That's actually not too far from where I am, and so I can understand that. But Hendrix was managed by a guy who was in the mob, apparently. Michael Jeffrey was known to openly boast of having organized crime connections and working also for the CIA. What? Mob and CIA? How could that be? Well, it makes sense if you understand what I've been telling you. After Jimmy's death, it was discovered that Jeffrey had been funneling most of Hendrix's money to offshore accounts in the Bahamas for drug trafficking. So there you go. Jim Morrison, his father, as we said, helped choreograph the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A few years after Jim's death, his common-law wife, Pamela Corson, dropped dead as well of a heroin overdose. Like Hendrix, Morrison had been an avid student of the occult, in particular fondness for the work of Crowley. So we're going to see Crowley popping up in the underground here pretty consistently throughout McGowan's book. And that's, well, everybody knows, I think, that Frank Sinatra had mob connections, but perhaps not that also, I don't know if Dave talks about it, but I don't recall, but Frank was also apparently an informant for the FBI on the mob. So they're kind of, everybody's watching everyone else and keeping tabs on everybody. And now Mama Cass fits into this, and the reason a lot of these people are listed here is that they are members of the 27 Club. And the 27 Club includes people like Janis Joplin. I believe Kurt Cobain is in that club. And he doesn't relate to Laurel Canyon per se, but Amy Winehouse is in the 27 Club. These are performers who died under mysterious circumstances, or so-called, quote, died at the age of 27, which is bizarre, isn't it? And I'm not going to list everybody in here. You're going to have to go read the book. But there's plenty of people that have strange deaths. Right? Graham Parsons connections. These kinds of people. Connections to Paul McCartney. Who spent a significant amount of time in the Laurel Canyon scene. So, quick way to end up dead. Spend time in the Laurel Canyon scene. Phil Oakes is the next character who comes to the forefront as this, I believe this is the guy who's this musical prodigy, if I remember correctly. And he ends up more or less insane, if I'm thinking of the right guy. Yeah, and so he ends up undergoing electroshock, and it appears that he's the programs that they put this music guy, the psychedelic rock guy, he's a pioneer of psychedelic rock, right? Phil Oakes, and OCHS, and he ends up being shocked in electroshock and undergoing basically what looks like MK Ultra style treatments, so to speak, so-called, quote, treatments that basically drive him insane. And he heard voices all of his life, which reminds me, if you listen to that Goofy documentary, what is it? The name escapes me, but it's one that everybody's heard of. It's on, it's been on YouTube for years, of Satanism and rock and roll. It's not Hell's Bells, it's something else. That was from the 90s, but it's the guy who has a really annoying voice. Pastor Joel Schimmel. This is Pastor Joel Schimmel. Did you know that Marilyn Manson is an evil guy, and he worships the devil? Here you can see in his rock videos, he shows the son of the devil. That's exactly how he talks. I can't remember the name of that video set, but there are interviews in that documentary with Brian Wilson and different Beach Boy characters where they describe also hearing voices. Now, does that mean that this is all true? Who knows? But I think that a lot of these musicians who are all tripped out on acid do experience these kinds of things. I've seen crazy stuff in my younger days when I unfortunately did LSD, so I can believe it. And I could believe that a lot of these people are just basically mentally ill, and that they could be part of, government social engineering, knowingly or unknowingly. Now, we come next to the character of Chuck Heath, who was born in 1938, and his family lived on Farmdale Avenue near the base at Laurel Canyon. There's a military base there, close to where Lookout Mountain Studios is located. And guess who Chuck Heath is? One of these prominent families in the Laurel Canyon scene. Can you guess who? Chuck Heath is the father of Sarah Palin. Can't make this stuff up. This is just wacky. I know. But yeah, now Lookout Mountain area. And by the way, listeners, we will probably be, Jay's Analysis will be doing on the scene reporting soon, I believe. We're going to check out Laurel Canyon and Mulholland Drive in LA very soon. And we will be trying to get pictures of all this and check it out firsthand. So yes, I'm actually going to take a trip there soon. And the Lookout Inn, Wonderland Park, Bungalow Land, the Log Cabin, these are all bizarre sights and scenes and locales for everything from ritual magic and occultism to murders and perhaps ritual murders, right? All kinds of just insane craziness in the Lookout Mountain area. So I will be going there and checking it out, doing a little firsthand journalistic reporting, and I'll let you know what I see. Houdini, yes, Harry Houdini was a resident in Laurel Canyon, and if you didn't know it, the tie-in to intelligence in Hollywood, well, guess what? Harry Houdini was a spy for Scotland Yard. What do you know? Now, one of the things that I had to go back and redo in terms of my book was the Lookout Mountain Laboratory, which I've mentioned in a few articles now. And this is relevant because you need to understand that the Lookout Mountain Laboratory was, I'm going to quote Dave here, originally envisioned as a fortified air defense center. Built in 1941 and nestled in 2.5 secluded acres off of what is now Wonderland Park Avenue, curious title, the installation was hidden from view and surrounded by an electric fence. By 1947, the facility featured a fully operational movie studio. In fact, it is claimed that the world's only completely self-contained movie studio is located here. With 100,000 square feet of floor space, the covert studio included sound stages, screening rooms, film processing labs, editing facilities, an animation department, and 17 climate-controlled film vaults. It also hosts a helicopter pad and a bomb shelter. Over its lifetime, the studio produced some 19,000 classified motion pictures. Bizarre. More than all of the Hollywood studio systems combined. This makes Laurel Canyon the actual motion picture capital of the world. Officially, the facility was run by the U.S. Air Force. Interesting. And what does the U.S. Air Force also have purview and aegis over? NASA. And it did nothing more nefarious than process the Atomic Energy Commission's footage of the atomic nuclear bomb tests, so-called, which do look to be manufactured and manipulated images. The studio was clearly equipped to do far more than just process film. Lookout Mountain Laboratory had advanced research and development department that was on the cutting edge of new film technology. Such technological advances as 3D effects come out of Laurel Canyon. Hollywood luminaries like John Ford, Jimmy Stewart, Howard Hawks, Ronald Reagan, Bing Crosby, Walt Disney, Hedda Hopper, Marilyn Monroe were all given clearance to work at the facility on undisclosed projects. There is no indication that any of them ever spoke of their work at the clandestine studio. The facility retained as many as 250 producers, directors, technicians, editors, animators, etc., civilian and military, all with top security clearances. Notice, Disney connection there. Ooh, see, it's coming together. You're starting to see that these things are all linked. Disney is a massive Pentagon mind control operation. They all report to work in a scheduled corner of Laurel Canyon. It had secret bunkers, underground facility. The existence of this facility remained unknown to the general public until the 90s, though it had been rumored that the CIA operated secret movie studios. Well, there we go. Rumors. Sometimes rumors are true. Filmmaker Peter Curran is the first to learn of its existence through classified documents he obtained while researching for his 1995 documentary Trinity and Beyond. And Dave points out that nobody has included this in their conspiracy literature. Yes, thank you, Dave. Awesome. Now let's look at some connections with CIA studios that relate to James Dean and Dennis Hopper. In the 1950s, as Barney Hoskins wrote in Hotel California, Laurel Canyon was home to the hippest young actors. Hoskins, Marlon Brando, James Dean, James Coburn, Dennis Hopper, Natalie Wood, etc., etc. Yes, that is curious. Now, a lot of suicides he brings up are connected to this. The Sunset Strip clubs, where, not strip clubs, but the Sunset Strip clubs, which I guess might as well have been strip clubs, hosted the Doors, the Byrds, the Mothers. Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper hung out consistently in these circles. We have connections, interestingly, to Robert Heinlein, a resident of the Laurel Canyon scene. And Robert Heinlein was, to my knowledge, at least Crowleyan in his science fiction philosophy. I don't know for sure if he was in any kind of cult, but I know that the presentation of his thought in his books is that, you know, you have with the moon is a harsh mistress. We have the libertarians working with the advanced AI to basically transcend global government. It's very bizarre. Everybody knows about Childhood's End, which is about the overlords, quote unquote, the gods, i.e. the elite, and so forth, being basically demonic. Heinlein was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, naval officer. He was a, quote, rabid right-winger, which, of course, that's not real right-wing. That's libertarian system right-wing, which is Crowleyanism, right? He was a good friend of Hubbard, who was also Crowleyan in his views. So Heinlein influenced Hubbard, maybe, well, it's not an accident that both of them are writing these just infinite sci-fi novels. I mean, come on. If you go and look at how, and, probably some of these are ghost-written. I don't know, but I find it hard to believe, as somebody who writes a lot, that L. Ron Hubbard was actually writing all of the. It's just insane. I mean, there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. But who knows? But I do know that ghostwriting is a much more prevalent than you think, as well as people stealing stuff. So now Frank Zappa again comes back because he's a massive member of the Robert Heinlein fan club. Barry Miles notes in Zappa's biography that Le Petit Prince, the Little Prince, this famous kids novel that's now a kids book or a movie, including Robert Heinlein's classic sci-fi Stranger in a Strange Land, is where Zappa would get a lot of the inspiration for his music. So it's interesting that these are the people who are promoted, right? In other words, you're in these certain circles. These circles are all connected to mob and CIA and government and military intelligence, and these are the kids of these people are who are promoted into the limelight. Now, Vito and the Freaks. This was a fascinating chapter because if you ever wondered how the idea or how the trend arose of groupies, right? Where did that come from? And that was part of this social engineering marketing. This ties into all this scene because Vito was this kind of weird guy who wandered around and basically just dallianced and engaged in orgies and so forth, and was, I guess, some kind of artist or film producer, a bunch of weirdos. And so you amassed this following of babes who I guess were more like kind of vagrant to runaways who ended up around this guy. And Vito, the reason Vito is relevant is because both Mondo Hollywood, Mondo style stuff, right? This arises out of the circles of Vito and these weirdo films, and that Vito apparently had little concern over the death of his son, which was in bizarre circumstances. Vito was connected to mobsters, Elmer Valentine, who owned the club and the organizer of the Monterey Pop Festival, and Jay Sebring, another mobster-connected business guy. And Vito is the model for Manson and his family. That's why it's interesting. Right? So these new alternative ways of living in revolutionary alternate communities. This is pioneered by Vito and his, quote, freaks. And what they would do is, because they were a spectacle, decked out in all their weirdness, they would kind of go around to the different clubs where the Doors of the Birds were playing, and they would become the focus, and they would bring people in. And Vito's chicks, I guess, would kind of go around topless, and kind of a forerunner perhaps to the feminist kind of slut walking type stuff. He was creating spectacle for the sake of spectacle. It has no meaning. But this is where Tim Leary comes in, because Leary was for a time in the same circles and promoting these different kind of student magazines that it was all about alternative ways of living, right? You don't have to go by all these strictures of 9 to 5s, and what you got to do, man, is just live day to day. And similar to the Jesus People movement, where it evolves into weird premillennial Hal Lindsey cults, and yes, Hal Lindsey's like Great Planet Earth, which is premillennial evangelical propaganda, was very popular amongst the Jesus People movement. So that also is connected to these kinds of social engineering strategies and tools, because Moses Berg, I think it's Moses Berg, David Berg, either one of the two, is the establishment connected founder of that cult, who was also a pedophile. The Family of God cult I'm talking about, Children of God, this is different from the Manson family. But in that cult, which is a sex-based cult, this is where you have the Phoenix family, right, River Phoenix, as well as Rose McGowan coming out of that cult. And so that's why. And Rose McGowan, she talks openly about this in plenty of interviews. But what's interesting is that cult wasn't just a cult, but as usual had establishment connections. Now, I won't go too far into all the Manson stuff, but suffice to say that Dave's thesis is very provocative and very convincing, that Vito's MO was the plan for, or model for, the kind of scenario that Manson would set up at the Spawn Ranch. And he's going to list things like Vito considered himself an artist, a poet, just like Manson. Vito was a guru. Vito surrounded himself by a flock of young runaways. Vito was considerably older than the followers. Vito addressed his flock as God. Vito called himself Captain Fuck, while Manson called himself God of Fuck. Vito is said to have a virtually insatiable libido, as Manson did. Vito adopted nicknames and depersonalized his cult followers, as Manson did. Vito's troupe included Beverly Hills hairstylist Sheldon Jamin, while Manson's cult included hairstylist Charles Watson, right? And so Watson, Tex Watson, and Bobby Boss O'Leil is where we get into the associations with Kenneth Anger and Lucifer Rising and all that. The Robert de Grimston and the Process Church. So I won't go into all that. Everybody can read on that on their own. That's been dealt with many times in different books. So next we come to LSD and the actors who like to trip, right? And who do we have here? Well, we have the Sunset Strip scene, and this is made up of people like Peter Fonda, Jack Nicholson, Bruce Dern, Dennis Hopper, Warren Beatty, Jane Fonda, Nancy Sinatra, Sharon Tate. So this is the drug scene connection to the to the Hollywood acting scene, whereas we were just dealing with the musician scene. Interesting. Bruce Dern is, I believe, he was something like a high-level State Department guy, and Bruce Dern is Laura Dern's dad. And if you've watched David Lynch movies, then you've seen quite a bit of Laura Dern. But most of us probably didn't know that Laura Dern's dad or granddad, was high-level spook, State Department type guy. So in regard to Michelle Phillips, John Phillips's early wife, just about everyone in the canyon had their way with her. So Jack Nicholson, Dennis Hopper, Warren Beatty, Roman Polanski, Gene Clark of the Byrds. Right, this is all right next to Mulholland Drive. So I think that's interesting, because if you read or if you watch David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, you'll see that it's all about this kind of stuff, and there's a cult in the background. And that's more or less what Dave kind of, Dave's not really focusing on cults, but that's more or less the kind of atmosphere he's describing, and he does touch on the cults here and there. And we'll see that this movie Easy Rider is a good iconic image of what's going on in this time period, this scene, 1969 film, and it's connected to the Solar Lodge, the OTO, Kenneth Anger's Circles, Satan's Children, one of his films, one of the guys who was the art director on Easy Rider would direct Satan's Children. This would be connected to the Manson group, and Bruce Dern is, here it is. So Dern's parents had rather impressive political connections, given that the baby Bruce's godparents were Eleanor Roosevelt. Interesting. So Laura Dern's family are Skull and Bones, and that's what's interesting. Now, I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying that Archibald MacLeish was essentially America's first Minister of War Propaganda. He served at various times as Assistant Secretary of State and Librarian of Congress. He was Skull and Bones. And yeah, so just again, if you're a David Lynch fan, that's pretty fascinating. But Dennis Hopper, we learn, was apparently interested in the OTOs for some period of time. Don't know if he was actually a member. It doesn't say. But the families are all into the occult, is what we kind of get out of that chapter, and that's relevant because, well, that's what I talk about in Esoteric Hollywood in some degree, not focusing on the families, but on the messages and mythologies that are presented in the films. So I do deal with Mulholland Drive in my book and what revelations might be shown in that film. And what's shown in the film, I argue, is pretty much what Dave is talking about here, right? So you definitely want to check that out. The Rand Corporation comes into this because he mentions Alex Abea's book, because the Rand Corporation, of course, is located out there in California. Jerry Brown is connected to these circles. He's the Moonbeam, or whatever they call him, the hippie governor of LA, quote unquote hippie. Yeah, right. Just an establishment figure. And yeah, Billy Briers is part of this scene because he's the most infamous male madam, the wealthy son of an oil magnate and part-time producer of gay porn. So Byers was said to have a stellar group of customers at his brothel at the summit of Laurel Canyon. So if you wonder why people call it Hollywood Babylon, well, there you go. Now, the father of LSD, everybody would probably think Tim Leary, although, Tim Leary popularized it, but the guy who was cooking it up is a guy by the name of Augustus Owsley Stanley. Owsley. So Owsley cooked up 4 million tabs throughout this period of LSD, that's where everybody was getting it. And the Grateful Dead, in their quote acid tests, were the promoters of it. So Owsley, BFF with the Dead, was both a financial backer and a sound engineer for the Dead, and he was the one making all the LSD. Owsley unleashed on the Haight-Ashbury district a particularly nasty hallucinogen, also known as STP, developed by the folks at Dow Chemical. STP had been tested extensively at Zappa's home, the Edgewood Arsenal, as a possible possible biowarfare agent. Then it was distributed as a recreational drug. Well, there you go. You think that you are ruled by people who love you, or you think that things just happen organically? No. Dow Chemical did not develop a biowarfare agent that accidentally got out as a recreational drug. That was let out to test what would happen to the masses of populations who basically became mind-blown zombies. Now, McGowan continues, and he gets into the question of other older characters who spent time in these circles. Errol Flynn. Now, interestingly, Errol Flynn apparently was a Nazi sympathizer. I don't think Dave talks about that, but I've read that and talk about that in my book. And these circles, by the 70s, would be connected to Werner Erhard, the creator of the EST cult, EST training cult, which is so popular, or was so popular, at least at this time, amongst corporate types. And that is what you see at the end of Mad Men, where Don Draper joins a cult, and he's joining EST. Phil Hartman, oddly enough, the Saturday Night Live comedian who had a strange death, was a album designer. Believe it or not, he designed album covers back in the day. And he designed albums for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So, believe it or not, Phil Hartman was in the Laurel Canyon circles. Interesting, because he met an untimely death. Roman Polanski, Rosemary's Baby, these are all films. Rosemary's Baby, I guess you could say that's a film that comes out of the spirit, right, of the Laurel Canyon scene, even though it's set, at the the Chelsea Hotel? The Dakota Building, the Dakota Building, where supposedly John Lennon was assassinated. Now the Chelsea Hotel is where Nico of Velvet Underground, her debut album Chelsea Girl was derived from the Chelsea Hotel, where Devin Wilson took a drive where the persona of John Train murdered the persona of Phil Oakes. So interesting. Now, if you've been listening since the beginning, this is my analysis of Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. And this is hour 2 that's free. I want to invite you to subscribe to Jay's Analysis for the full talks, lectures, and interviews. You get access to my archives. Very popular. I have almost all 5-star reviews across the board. I think the books going to have the same, positive status. My subscribers have 90 to 95% satisfaction. They love what I do. And I want to thank all you subscribers, especially out there, that have kept me going, that have allowed me to transition into doing this consistently on a full-time basis. That's great. I love you guys, and you guys keep me going. And if you're new to this, check out Jay's analysis. In the second half, the second hour, we're going to get into more of this craziness with the Laurel Canyon scene. We're going to talk about how the record industries actually promoted all of this that was supposed to be counterculture and what that demonstrates. We're going to get into more of how the Eagles tie into this and all the bizarreness here. The Altamont Festival with the Rolling Stones and the mysterious death there. More Satanism. David Carradine, Dennis Hopper. More of the situations relating to Orson Welles or the Black Dahlia. How surrealism ties into this. These different art movements. We're going to talk about all of that and break that down in even more depth and detail. And really get to the meat. As we said, more meat. I think we've done pretty good so far here in the first hour talking about Dave's work. And be sure and get Dave's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon Covert Ops and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. And also get my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, which is a great complement to Dave's book. So yeah, go to jaysanalysis.com, subscribe for $4.95 a month. I also now have the yearly option. If I've got a lot of people who wanted to do yearly subscriptions. So absolutely, there's a button for that now on the subscription page where you can subscribe for $60 for 1 year. And you'll get all of my new material right into your inbox on a very consistent basis. There's almost every day new posts, and of course most weeks there's more than one audio that you get access to. So thank you for listening, and be sure and check out jaysanalysis.com. I also want to thank Alternate Current Radio for hosting this great network over there. They host Boiler Room, they host Patrick Henningson's Sunday Wire, the best geopolitical breakdown that you can find. Far superior to anything on mainstream media or even in the circus of alternate media. And I want to thank the guys over at Hoaxbusters. Be sure and check out hoaxbusterscall.com. Great podcasts over there. Great information on deconstructing the lies and synthetic nature of our society. And check out Jamie Hanshaw's book, Hollywood Mind Control, which you can find the images there, the very colorful red images, at jaysanalysis.com. And you can purchase her book, which is another excellent complement to Dave's book and my book. So thank you for listening, and check out Hour 2. Oh, and I needed to make a correction there, actually. It's not Laura Dern's dad. It's Laura Dern's, I believe, great-granddad, who was the Secretary of War, high-level Pentagon PSYOPs fellow. So not Bruce Dern, obviously, the dad, but his granddad, I believe. So anyway, check out Hour 2, and thank you for listening.